if there was an incident in the UK, a terrorist incident, the police would request our help. So the guys would rush from Hereford straight down to the scene, and then they would prep to see how the outcome what was going to happen with the outcome. Now, the first bit of kit we would use was our fireproof underwear, which I'll not get Tom to put on, but hold up. Now, a long time ago, there was an incident in London. It was the Iranian embassy at Princess Gate, and the regiment stormed that embassy. Now, some guys at the back were abseiling from the roof down the back of the building, and as the siege went on, they were posting flashbangs and explosive charges to blow the armoured glass. Well, what happened is the curtains caught fire, and one of the guys was abseiling down, and on his device, his descender device, it got tangled up, and he got caught above the window. Well, in them days, we only used cotton coveralls, so there was no protection against fire. And this guy had really badly burnt legs and a badly burnt back. So what we did is we went to the F1 guys and to see what the racing car drivers were wearing. And they were wearing an underwear which was made of a Nomex material. Now, Nomex is fireproof, and this will give you a lot of protection if you're caught in an area which is on fire. I'll put them down, mate. The next piece of equipment is your outer overalls, which I'll get Tom to put on. These, again, are made of a Nomex material, which is fireproof, so you have 2 layers of protection. They're very good. Now, we used to go down to the Morton-on-Marsh the Fire Brigade's training centre, and there they have buildings, aircraft, vehicles they can set on fire and then turn the temperatures up. Well, we could go in there with this equipment and work really well without getting burnt. Now, if you can notice, on Tom's arm, there's a red flash. On the anti-terrorist team, the guys, 64 men, were split up into 2 teams. There was a red team and a blue team. Now, the reason we would have 2 teams was, basically, one set of guys had 30 minutes notice to move. So if the call came in, they had to be packed up and then travelling to that incident within 30 minutes. Then the other team would be called in on a 3-hour notice to move. Now, what the idea was, basically you would maybe call in red team, they would shoot off, and a lot of the time the incidents were in London. They'd be driving en route to London. The head shed, or the commanders, would be flying via helicopter into that area. Then blue team would come in, and they would start planning the operation. And also they would be held in Hereford just in case there was another incident happen somewhere else in the country, because the last thing you need is both teams heading to one area and you find actually there's something else happening maybe in the north of England. The blue team would be calling in maybe architects or people who have actually worked in this particular building where the incident's happening. So what the guys would be doing is doing a deliberate plan. So they would be studying the building, looking at the floor plans, everything, and then they would be in communications with the red team, briefing them as they get down there. The next piece of equipment is the body armour. Now, this is a training body armour, so it's not very heavy. If I can pop this over your head. Now, on an operational body armour, they can weigh up to 60 kilograms. That's a lot. Obviously, when you have a full body armour, you have shoulder pads on here, you have a groin protection, it's a large flap that hangs down, and you have 2 large ceramic plates which fit in the front, in here and in the back. Now, they will stop a high-velocity round from an AK-47 or a similar type of weapon. So that is very, very heavy. Now, this is why the regiment, when they were on the anti-terrorist team, would spend a lot of time in the gym, basically doing a lot of push-ups, weight training, everything. So your upper body strength, you had to have a very good upper body strength to carry this equipment. The next piece of equipment is your holster, which would house your pistol. Push this around your waist. Can you get that in? Suck it up. Yeah, Tom might be tall, but he's also fat. Go on. fact, 2 minutes. We'll loosen this out. There we go. There. And then we've got a band that just goes around, which keeps your pistol to one side. The pistol that we used to use was the Browning. It's a 9mm pistol. Then we moved on to the Sig Sauer. Now the Sig Sauer 226, this is a very, very reliable weapon. And it's quite unique because it's also very, very accurate. And it's easy to use. It would hold a 13-round magazine and fires 9mm. We had a requirement to hit a target the whole length of this room. So basically we would spend every day in the firing range putting hundreds of rounds down, and the target was probably the size of a human head, and you had to get 2 rounds into that target. So there's a lot of time spent on the range. Your pistol was always your secondary weapon. I've got some other weapons that I'll be showing you later on, but this one was in case your main armament failed, and then you could draw your pistol. The only time we'd really use these without a main armament is if we were entering an aircraft. We would use the pistol. Now, in some cases, we would be going in to do a hard arrest, which would mean we were going in to arrest somebody who was deemed very, very dangerous. So they would hand it over to us. So we would have these type of handcuffs, and they're a snap handcuff where you can actually, when you hit that, it actually clicks in, and then you've got the person. And because that is a solid link between the second handcuff, once you've got it on a person, you can bend it, and then you can maneuver that person, and it makes it very, very painful. So that was when we had to do a hard arrest. The next piece of equipment is your ops waistcoat. Now this is where you carry all your ammunition, your flashbangs, a little medical pack, and the most important thing is your communication system. Now if you can imagine, if this was if there was an incident in this school and we were all hostages here, what would be happening is the OC would be planning, and he'd have a large whiteboard, and on there would be a plan of your school with each individual room, and they would all have their own designated numbers. Now as we went into the school, we would use what we call a multi-room entry. So guys would be coming through every window and every door possible. And when that happens, and you've got maybe 120 guys crawling around your school, there's a chance of having what they call a blue on blue. So you may have a guy coming, or a team coming through that door, and a team coming through that window. So communications were vital, that you would actually be talking to the boss and telling him, we're just about to enter maybe X1. So he could then look at the angle as you're coming in and what you would be seeing, and then he may tell that team just to hang back just a fraction before they actually come in, because there's a chance that they could end up shooting one another. So your communications, which were on this side here with your radio, were very, very important. Now, that radio would be linked up to a throat mic, and that would be on your throat, and all you had to do is hit a pressel and just start talking. You would then, this is why we'd have the red one here, your call sign, because as you'll see, as we get Tom dressed up, it's very, very difficult to see each individual. Now, quite a scary but funny story was in the early 80s. I was on the anti-terrorist team, and Prince Charles and Princess Diana, you all know who Princess Diana is, yep. She came up to Hereford, and she wanted to join us on the anti-terrorist team and do some training. So we dressed her up in all of this gear, and we took her down to what we call the killing house, which was a large building where you can fire live ammunition into that building. And whenever we enter a room, we always place a flashbang, which is it's a sonic boom and a blinding flash. So if I drop this here now, there'd be a massive bang where you would think you were, temporarily deafened. but you'd also be temporarily blinded as well with a flash. And what these do is give us vital seconds as we move into the room. Because as soon as one of these goes off, everybody turns around and looks like that and down, and they're stunned for a moment. Well, we can run in and then grab them. Well, we got to the killing house with Princess Diana, and there was one guy in front. She was going to be the second person, and then there was several others behind her. We asked her to pull her hood up, and she didn't want to. I'm presuming she didn't want to disturb her hair or whatever it was. But anyway, so we said, right, let's go. Now, the order to go in is stand by, go. That order was given. When on the go, a guy just down here, he threw the flashbang in, but instead of it going into the room, what happened is it hit the top of the doorway and actually bounced down right behind her head and went off. And it actually set her hair on fire. And as her hair went on fire, the guys behind her saw this, so they started hitting her in the back of the head really hard, which was making her run into the room really hard, and we were trying to drag her back and pull her back out of the room, as well as hitting her on the back of the head. So she came out of the room quite stunned, and we said, you know, are you all right? She went, oh, that was absolutely fabulous, but I couldn't understand why that man was hitting me on the back of the head. And then the sergeant in charge said, oh, you will, ma'am, when you look in the mirror. And she went to Australia about about a week later. And in all the tabloids and all the newspapers, it said Princess Diana has a new hairstyle for a visit to Australia. And nobody knew the SAS had burnt it off. If I can get Tom to spin round, here what we'd have is your explosive packs. One thing the regiment's very good at is explosive entry. So on the planning phase of the operation, we would look at whether or not we had to blow any holes into walls, any armoured glass, or any armoured doors. Now, the theory we had is if you could see the hinges on the door, you would use a shotgun with a Hatton round to blow the hinges off. If you couldn't see the hinges, you would put a strip of det cord, which looks like washing line, and it's highly explosive. But that would cut a door in two. So the number 3 of the team would pre-make all his charges, and they would be placed in this pack here. You'd also carry a knife, and this is the only time we'd ever really carry a knife, but it was a quick opening knife that you could use with one hand. And the reason we carry a knife was in case you got caught up on a rope and maybe one hand's tangled up, or you may have your weapon in this hand, and you could just then cut the rope yourself. Tom, turn around. Now, this is where we enhance Tom's looks. This is a respirator, and hopefully it'll fit. Is that okay, mate? If you feel faint, fall that way. Okay? Right, when you're wearing a respirator, we obviously use gas. One of the things is gas. We can send gas in, which will... it's a gas called a CR, which you can't stay in the room. It's nearly 100 times stronger than CS gas. So it would be futile putting a handkerchief over your nose and thinking you could get away with it. But the trouble is, when you use gas, it's a double-edged weapon. So you have to make sure the seals are all well-fitting, all around there. Now, when you wear a respirator, it affects your peripheral vision. It's nearly like having blinkers on. Would you agree? Now, we would train a lot with a respirator on. We would go into the gym, and we would do shuttle sprints up and down. We would climb ropes and abseil with these on all the time. Now, Tom, I'm going to try and get this hood on. Lift your chin. Good lad. Okay. The next thing is the ballistic helmet. Now, when I joined the regiment, these hadn't been invented. So we used to run around like this. Obviously, there was quite a lot of head injuries from when we used to come in fast rope or abseil in. Guys would be up maybe above you, and as they were abseiling in, the pistol may fall out, or a hammer might fall out, or a short ladder, and we would always be constantly getting guys who would have head injuries. We then moved on to a ProTac helmet, which is what you see canoeists wearing, but they will not stop any projectiles. With these, and they're quite heavy, they will stop projectiles from any explosions that you're setting, and also any rounds like 9mm, this would stop. So I'll place this on Tom's head. Now he's starting to look a bit like Darth Vader. Next thing, gloves. Gloves are very important. These are American aviator gloves, which we'd use. They're again made out of a Nomex material, and they're fireproof. And they have a leather on this side, which helps you grip your weaponry or a rope or whatever you're holding. The other type of glove is what we call a zap glove, and these are full of lead and sand. Now, Tom, can you slip them on? Right? The reason we'd use these, if we had to punch into a vehicle window, you could use them, or if you had to punch your way through a glass window, you wouldn't get your hands wouldn't be cut from the shards of glass. They'd be protected. Footwear was very, very important. So we went to Adidas, and Adidas made us an assault boot. It gives protection on your ankles, because sometimes the guys are going to free fall into the area. Also, the abseiling and the fast roping, you need protection of your ankles. And the soles were very important. In some cases, we'd be climbing on an aircraft wing, which when an aircraft descends into the airport, there's a lot of condensation on the wings. So you needed to have a grip on there. If you're climbing up a glass-fronted building, it had to grip that, or maybe on a train or on the tube. So boots were very important. Armaments. Our main armament was the Heckler & Koch 9mm. And this fires a 9mm round, exactly the same as the pistol. On an operational weapon, you would have a laser underneath and a torch above that. Now, these weapons were very, very reliable. They're very, very good. You'll see the police carrying these when they're at the airports. I've never had a problem with this weapon. It would have a semi-automatic, so you squeeze the trigger, it would fire, it would reload, and then fully automatic. Now, one of the funniest things I saw with one of these is back at Hereford, we had some ladies from Whitehall come up for a demonstration, which we would basically storm various buildings and put a show on. That's all it was. Well, on one particular one, we were showing them the capabilities of fighting at night or in total darkness. So we had a room, and it was very similar to the same size of this room. And what we'd have is one entrance here, and in the room there was lots of furniture. And down that side we had some mine tape to usher the guests down so their backs were against the wall, and we had a target in front. Now, the guy who was hosting would talk to the ladies and basically explain that we had the capabilities of using night sights and operating in total darkness. Well, I was hidden behind a wardrobe in that direction over there. And then, on his command, the lights were turned off. So I would have to come out with a suppressed MP5 and creep out with my night sight, which I've got one in a minute to show you, and then stand and then put a burst of rounds into this target. Now, the guests were only standing about 2 feet away, and it was to basically show them, get the feel and the excitement in the theatre. So as I lifted the weapon up to start firing, in my peripheral vision, I could see this young lady start to move and twitch and do it. So every time I lifted the weapon up to fire, I put a couple more rounds down. She started twitching even more and more. And I thought, God, I hope she doesn't move. So I lifted it up and then fired a long burst to finish, whereupon she absolutely screamed out. So we put the lights on straight away immediately to see what was happening. Well, we never thought. When you operate an MP5, it ejects the rounds, the brass rounds, which are very, very hot from the side. And they'd actually been going down her blouse and burning her chest. So that's why she'd been twitching all the time. So yes, it was a big mistake. The second weapon we moved on to was the UPM, the Universal Machine Pistola, which fires a 45 round. Now, it fires about 750 rounds per minute, which you may think is fast, but it's actually relatively slow for a submachine gun. And the 45 round was a heavier and a harder fitting round. Now, if you fire a weapon on fully automatic, it has the characteristics to rise to the right. So you're wasting rounds and it becomes very dangerous. So what we asked was Heckler & Koch put a burst transmitter onto this weapon. So when you squeezed the weapon or the trigger, 3 rounds came out, just 3 rounds. So you had to keep squeezing, but it would be a quick burst. And it made the weapon very, very accurate. And obviously you had a torch. On the bottom of the torch would be zeroed to where the rounds would fall. So that meant you could actually use a weapon just holding it like this. Wherever I put the beam, that's where the rounds would fall. So you didn't have to lift it up to zero it in on anybody. You just hold it like this. Here we have a bungee, which I'll get Tom to slip your hand through there, mate. And it crosses over. And put your arm through here. Now, Tom, if you can point that in a safe direction, maybe at one of the teachers. The next piece of equipment was the night sight. Now, this is a Mark 1 generation. We're actually on to Mark 5, I think, now. And this was a monocular type where it fits on your head. And what we would do is actually have that fitted on there and then approach the stronghold, ideally in total darkness. These weren't ideal because, again, you're looking down a small tube with both eyes, and it was very, very hard to operate. Now you will see some Special Forces soldiers, and they will have 4 tubes coming out of the device, and it actually gives you it opens your peripheral vision up, and they're absolutely brilliant. So we would use these on the approach, and as soon as it went noisy, we would throw them off and put them down to one side. Now, the last piece of equipment, if there was an incident overseas and it involved the anti-terrorist team, what the guys would do now, they wouldn't take the UPM or the MP5, they would take the M4. Now, this has got a harder hitting round. It's a 5.56. It's got a cycle rate of 750 to 950 rounds. It's gas operated. It's very, very reliable. This is the weapon you would see Special Forces using out in Iraq and Afghanistan. On here you can put various lasers and torches onto this weapon.